Well, he did it, lads. CM Punk main evented night 1 of a buy one get of WrestleMania. It feels like a fitting year for Punk to achieve his goal, because 2025 marks 20 years since Punk first signed with WWE. At age 46, he's become the longest tenured star to get from the developmental territory to the main event of WrestleMania, which is not a diss at all, because most people never make it that far. I thought then, to commemorate this, I might follow the timeline of Punk leaving the Indies and becoming a WWE superstar. In this video, we'll cover CM Punk's most notable indie matches, the behind the scenes speculation, and any interviews I could find from the time. I've decided to cover the few months from the first interest that WWE showed in Punk to when he actually signed his contract. As such, we won't be covering what's commonly known as the Summer of Punk here, his unexpected Ring of Honor World title reign. You could call it the Spring of Punk maybe. On April 11th, 2005, a week after WrestleMania 21, CM Punk would wrestle a match for WWE that would air on Sunday Night Heat in Moline, Illinois. He would team with Russell Simpson to lose to the team of Simon Dean and Maven. And the most notable thing about the match was Jonathan Coachman and Todd Grisham on commentary thinking that the name of the team was CM Punk, not the man himself, making them seem rather foolish. I won't go any further into that match here, as I talked about it in a video I made a year and a half ago, in which I was looking for CM Punk's first televised WWE match. It does serve though as a useful jumping on point, so we're gonna start here. There's nothing really remarkable about April 2005 for Punk, except that he couldn't win a title to save his life. On April 8th, he lost to Jimmy Jacobs for the IWA Mid-South Heavyweight title, a promotion we'll get back to in a while. On April 22nd, he and Don Juan lost a tournament final to crown the first ever Full Impact Pro Tag Team Champions. Then a day later, he failed to beat Homicide for the FIP Heavyweight title. Rounding out the month, Punk lost in the opening round of the IWC Super Indie Tournament to the eventual winner, John McChesney, a bloke I knew nothing about but is still going today apparently. That same tournament was won in the year previous and after by Sterling James Keenan, better known to WWE fans as Corey Graves. See, Corey Graves got one over on Punk. I'm being pretty flippant here, but the point I'm trying to make is that CM Punk wasn't exactly on his indie farewell tour in April of 2005. And he's barely mentioned in the newsletters at all, except for in ROH results. Even in Ring of Honor, he had a pretty unremarkable month, defeating Mike Cruel in a 4-minute match at Stalemate. But as May came around, his name was being passed around quite a bit more. On May 8th, 2005, Dusty Rhodes would be a guest on Wrestling Observer Live. The booker for TNA at the time talked about a few subjects, but made a point of saying he was interested in bringing in CM Punk, following his run there in 2003 and 4. When talking about his hopes that TNA would find a new TV deal soon, having just left Fox Sports Net, Dusty had this to say about his vision for Impact.
So I know they're talking with some people, I know you know they're talking with some people. Let's just hope something really cool happens that we're able to show these young kids. Mixed with some older guys, you know, not a lot, but in there to where they see this X Division and what it's all about. And you know, I'm looking at a lot of young guys right now. I'm really interested in this CM Punk kid. I know you're familiar with him, but
oh yeah,
I like him in that position.
Just 2 days later, on May 10th, Dusty would show up for a TNA Impact taping and be told that he would now be booking as part of a committee with Scott D'Amore, Bill Banks and Jeremy Borash. According to The Observer, Dusty would quit the company that same day, citing the booking inexperience of some of his colleagues in the new group. This career change for Dusty might well have halted any plans to bring Punk in, but TNA would regain some interest in him later on. In an interesting twist, by September, Dusty would be working for WWE Creative. But just before that, in August, he would wrestle a match in Ohio Valley Wrestling, not long before Punk would arrive there. His tag team partner, a very young in his career Cody Runnels, not even using the Rhodes name yet. Also on May 10th, 2005, the next day after his match with Val Venus, which I talked about in my previous video, Punk would wrestle a dark match at the SmackDown and Velocity tapings. His opponent would be the Amazing Red, competing in his only WWE match ever in his 25-year-long career. The match was released a few months ago on the treasure chest that is known as the WWE Vault channel, and is particularly noteworthy for seeing Punk work like a much bigger wrestler than himself against the smaller Red. In a Reddit Ask Me Anything a few years ago, Amazing Red made some very cryptic comments about this match, which as far as I can tell are more about him not ever working for WWE again, more than they're about Punk. On May 14th, Punk would have the final match in a violent feud with Jimmy Rave and the Embassy for Ring of Honor, having had a brutal dog collar match with Rave on May 7th that Rave had won with some unprotected chair shots. Punk would win this time in a steel cage match. The storyline had aimed to turn the Embassy from a comedic undercard group into more serious heels, with them at one point attempting to remove the straight edge tattoo on CM Punk's abdomen with a cheese grater. Ah yes, the same Ring of Honor where Homicide once poured Drano down Colt Cabana's throat to shut him up. Aye, that Ring of Honor. I only mention Punk's matches with Rave here, as they were happening around the same time as his WWE tryouts, and had to be taking a toll on him physically. Speaking of indie matches, on May 21st, Punk would wrestle IWA Mid-South promoter Ian Rotten on a tribute show for Chris Candido, who had recently passed away. The show would include many former ECW names who had worked with Candido, as well as some TNA talent like Elix Skipper, Andy Douglas of The Naturals, who was picked for the event by Tammy Sitch, and Shark Boy. Yeah, definitely ended with the best one there. IWA Mid-South was one of the promotions where Punk first got noticed, and so you could say that Rotten gave Punk one of his first breaks in wrestling. Despite Ian's hardcore reputation, the two had a pretty straight wrestling match, with some comedy moments like Ian pulling Punk's tights, so we see a bit more of younger Punk than I was expecting. CM Punk would continue to wrestle for IWA Mid-South for a few more months, having his last match for them in July, when it was clear that he would be WWE bound. In the May 23rd Wrestling Observer newsletter, it would be noted that TNA's new booking team might still want CM Punk after all, along with two more Ring of Honor greats. The new booking team is interested in getting Bryan Danielson, Samoa Joe and CM Punk. Joe is a probable, because definite ideas have been discussed for him. Of the three, Samoa Joe is the only one that will be hired by TNA, joining the company a month later at their Slammiversary pay-per-view. On May 23rd and 4th, CM Punk would work two more WWE Dark matches. On the Monday, he would defeat Tough Enough 3 winner Matt Cappotelli, and on the Tuesday, he would lose to Scotty 2 Hottie. What a couple of days. What's most interesting about these matches is that they were Punk's first time in the WWE ring, which weren't in a regular Ring of Honor town. By that time, Ring of Honor had only held one event in Wisconsin during Punk's tenure there, and the next would come 8 years later. At Death Before Dishonor 2 Night 1, Punk and some other bloke would retain the tag team titles in a main event against the Briscoes. Despite Punk having quite a few WWE matches to this point, there was still nothing reported that they had any interest in signing him, but that would change a week later. In the May 30th Wrestling Observer newsletter, Dave Meltzer would write about WWE wanting all three of the Ring of Honor wrestlers that TNA had expressed interest in, apparently just because TNA wanted them. An internal memo at WWE was circulated to John Laurinaitis, telling him he needed to get on the ball and sign CM Punk, Bryan Danielson and Samoa Joe, because TNA is after all three. Clearly, WWE will make offers to anyone who even shows a hint of getting over on the new show, or who they find out TNA shows any interest in. History shows few will turn those offers down. Mid-2005 was an interesting time for TNA, as Impact had left its first TV channel, Fox Sports Net, and would eventually debut on Spike TV in October, and they were looking for new talent to bring in to give them a competitive edge. WWE being WWE didn't want that to happen, so here's hoping that Laurinaitis wouldn't fumble again and sign the wrong one-legged wrestler, cause that's a thing he definitely did. In the following week's newsletter, Dave provides a brief update, saying that Punk had been offered a deal and would likely start in Ohio Valley Wrestling, which he eventually would. His choice of words when referring to Danielson are interesting though, like he's some cave dweller that they have to find and chuck a contract at, instead of the clam digger we all know he is. On the same day over in the Figure 4 weekly newsletter, Brian Alvarez would report on Ring of Honor announcing that Punk would be challenging for the world title on June 18th. He writes, "The biggest selling point is, can CM Punk finally win a world title? Seeing as to how WWE will probably be signing him shortly, I'd say the answer is no. We'll soon find out that Brian is quite the clairvoyant." On the same day, June 6th, Slam Sports published an interview with CM Punk, in which a great deal of Punk's time is spent mulling over the differences between WWE and TNA. While he clearly enjoys two companies making offers to him, he notes that the two are at that point worlds apart in terms of size. "This is probably only going to happen to me once the way the wrestling business is, with there only being one place to make a living and TNA trying their best to make it two places. I'm probably never going to see this much attention in my career, so I'm just trying to enjoy it." CM Punk there, also a clairvoyant. He also goes as far as noting that TNA at that point didn't have any TV, and saying that Ring of Honor would only get television if a billionaire suddenly decides to give us $1 million, or if we get put on some kind of network or station where we don't have to fund it. Maybe he actually is a clairvoyant. One final really interesting thing that Punk says is that he's been sitting on an offer for a week, implying that him leaving at all might not be a certainty. The June 13th Observer offers a little more context to this, but as we're going in chronological order, we'll get to that in a minute. On June 12th, Punk would wrestle Roderick Strong at Ring of Honor's The Future Is Now event in New York. Going into the show, the big talking point was Shane Douglas making an appearance to promote Hardcore Homecoming, his ECW reunion show that was competing with WWE's One Night Stand on the same weekend. Coming out of it though, CM Punk was the big story. Roderick Strong at this time was an enforcer of sorts for the Ring of Honor champion Austin Aries. If you were gunning for the champion, you would have to get past Roddy first, so Punk beating him was very significant. Post-match, Punk got on the microphone and stated that his goal was to win the ROH title. There was just one problem though. The internet-savvy Ring of Honor fans all knew that Punk had one foot out the door. In his report of the show, Dave Meltzer would note how the times have changed, as the ECW fans would have drowned Punk out with "You sold out" chants, while a few years later, the Ring of Honor faithful shouted "Please don't go." In the June 13th Observer, Dave Meltzer attempts to clarify why Punk might have been sitting on that WWE offer I mentioned earlier, citing that Punk is doing well for himself without needing to report to Ohio Valley Wrestling, WWE's developmental territory at the time. Punk is said to be 50-50. The deal with Punk is, between all his indie bookings, his announcing work with ROH, and running the ROH wrestling school, he's not getting rich, but he's not struggling either. He doesn't need to be an OVW guy. Dave also points out that Punk essentially ruled out TNA with this interview. He gave the impression that if it was a big money offer he'd have already signed. He said he only considers that he's gotten one offer, saying, "Obviously there's TNA, but how much of an offer can they give me if they don't have TV?" On June 14th, as reported in the newsletters later in the week, Samoa Joe would sign his TNA contract and would be set to make his first appearance at their Slammiversary pay-per-view on the 19th. In one last note about CM Punk and TNA, Dave claims in the June 20th Observer that TNA had wanted to promote CM Punk vs Samoa Joe on this event, but it wouldn't happen because Punk would have wanted a much longer match than TNA would be willing to give them. Punk eyed some people here by saying he wasn't going to come in and work with Joe because they weren't going to let him go 45 minutes. The reaction was, "Good luck in your 5-minute matches on Velocity." Dave noted that since TNA didn't have a TV deal yet, playing off the famous Ring of Honor trilogy of matches between the two would be an attempt to draw in the internet-savvy fans, which is a very clever strategy, given that those fans were the only market they had access to at the time. In the build-up to Slammiversary, TNA had been airing episodes of Impact on its own website, which mainly focused on a Chris Candido memorial tournament, and not many main storylines to tide them over. In the same newsletter, it was noted that Punk was expected to sign his WWE contract that week, and that Ian Rotten had said in a promo that Punk's last indie match would be with IWA Mid-South on June 17th, a show that would be titled It's Clobbering Time. This would end up being false, to put it lightly, as Punk would wrestle 2 more matches for IWA Mid-South, a slew of other final indie dates, and a whole ROH World title run, but we'll get to that. On June 18th, 2005, against what everyone expected to happen, CM Punk would defeat Austin Aries to win the Ring of Honor Championship. Given that all the ROH fans knew by now that Punk was leaving, the win came as a genuine shock, as everyone expected Punk to bow out, having never held the title. In The Observer, Dave would note that Booker Gabe Sapolsky's inspiration had been the Dudley Boys' final night in ECW, when they would win the tag team titles and threaten to take them to Vince McMahon. While that would play out as a show-long storyline, with them losing the belts later that night, this time Punk would get away with the title and hold it for nearly 2 months. If Punk winning the title was a shock, what happened next was even more of one, as in his victory speech he would proceed to turn on the fans in attendance, in arguably one of the better promos he's ever done in his whole career. I strongly recommend that you seek this promo out if you've never seen it, after this video please. To try and work the fans even further, ROH booker Gabe Sapolsky would lose it in front of the fans, claiming that Punk was stealing the belt and heavily implying that he had gone off script, when in reality it was all part of the plan. In The Observer, Dave noted that Punk at one point had one more date advertised, July 8th in Long Island, New York. The show would be named Sign of Dishonor for what Punk would do on that night. The table was now laid for what we know today as the Summer of Punk. On July 8th at Sign of Dishonor, Punk would enter wearing a suit, a very uncharacteristic thing for him to do, and he would sign his WWE contract on the Ring of Honor Championship belt inside the ROH ring, which was seen as an act of disrespect to ROH. While going into the show, everyone expected Punk to lose and be on his way out. He would retain the title against future world champion Jay Lethal and would defend it again the next night against Roderick Strong. There's one more interesting trivia note about Sign of Dishonor though. It's actually the first show where Punk used Cult of Personality by Living Colour to walk to the ring to, a song that's become synonymous with him over the years since. He would use this song throughout his last dates with Ring of Honor until his final night with the company, when he would come out in tears to Night Train by the Bouncing Souls, mouthing along with the words. Night Train is a beautiful song about saying goodbye to what you know and moving on without much of your past to hold on to. Punk would use another song from the same album called New Day in his WWE-produced documentary in 2012, for which he was given an unusual amount of control over. In the July 18th Observer, Dave offered a little explanation as to what was actually going on. He's back on the 7/16 show in Woodbridge, Connecticut against James Gibson, which may be the title change, being that Gabe Sapolsky believes that Gibson right now is as good as anyone in the business. It's not a lock, as Punk has no start date in OVW or WWE right now, but those things change on a dime, and they're going to play this angle out as long as they can. Challenger after challenger would try, and knowing the dates Punk had left were dwindling, nobody could take the title off him. Ironically, Punk would finally lose to a former WWE star, now making a new name for himself on the indies, James Gibson, formerly known as Jamie Noble in WWE. Over the next few weeks, Punk would continue to say his farewell to the indie scene. On July 1st and 3rd, he would leave IWA Mid-South, having matches with Matt Sydal, the future Evan Bourne, and a 1-hour time limit draw with Delirious. On July 10th, he would have his final match for Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, a company he'd worked for since their 5th ever event in 2003, beating Ricky Reyes. With all his indie dates done, Punk would report to OVW officially in mid-September. One final thing from the Wrestling Observer that I'd like to add is a quote from Dave in the September 19th issue, the week that Punk first checked in Ohio. Punk was buried on his Heat appearance backstage, in particular by Triple H, Michaels and Hayes. The line on him was that he didn't know how to get over, and the way he wrestles is like he's doing a simulated wrestling match and not working a wrestling match. I wonder why they didn't get on. Dave notes in the same report though, that one man who moved down to OVW on July 10th had really taken a shine to him. Punk should do just fine because he can talk and because Heyman likes him. Hopefully, like Benoit, Guerrero, Mysterio and Jericho did as time went on. He'll also eventually learn how to work. I think we can agree he did. When you go back and look at some of the biggest stories of 2005, you look at the rise of John Cena and Batista to the main events. You look at ECW reunion shows, and more controversial stories like Matt Hardy, Edge and Lita's situation, and the ladder match for the custody of Dominic. Didn't do him any harm. It's crazy to think about in a way, that a story that fits right in among them was about an independent wrestler working for the third top promotion in the US, leaving to start at the bottom of WWE. But then Punk has always had a way of drawing the headlines. It would take him 20 years from there, but he would finally get to the main event of WrestleMania, even if he's now telling us he didn't want it anyway. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.